Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a topic that has absolutely fascinated historians, psychologists, and business executives for well over a century. We are talking about leadership trait theory. We're going to get right down to the bottom of the age-old question: what truly makes a great leader? Is it just some magical ingredient in their DNA, or is it a specific set of skills that literally anyone can pick up? Let's dive into the data and decode the very essence of leadership.
So, let's kick things off with this massive, fundamental question. Are leaders born or are they made? When we look at towering historical figures or those visionary CEOs, it's so easy to just assume they were born with a special spark. But is that actually the whole story? Can someone who isn't naturally charismatic or dominant learn to lead just as effectively? This tension is the beating heart of leadership trait theory, and it's exactly what we're going to unravel today.
All right, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with an intro to leadership trait theory, move into eagerness, consistency, and integrity, and then discuss cognitive ability and competencies. After that, we'll hit the key advantages of trait theory, tackle the born versus made debate, and wrap it all up with some real-world leadership applications.
Let's jump right into Section 1, Intro to Leadership Trait Theory. Basically, this whole concept kicked off in the 19th century as the great man hypothesis. And they meant great man quite literally, by the way. Early researchers were pretty much only studying kings, generals, and presidents. The operating belief back then was that these extraordinary individuals were simply born with a special set of traits that average people just don't possess. Over time, though, this evolved into a much more scientific approach, aiming to identify exactly what those innate qualities and characteristics actually were that separated the leaders from the non-leaders.
And if you look at the historical shift in the data here, it's actually super fascinating. Take Ralph Stogdell's early list from 1948 on the far left. He focused heavily on sheer brain power, things like intelligence, alertness, and initiative. But as we move across to more modern researchers like Zuccaro in the 2000s, you start seeing this pivot toward traits like emotional stability, agreeableness, and social intelligence. It really highlights this massive shift from viewing leaders as just these hyper-intelligent, dominant figures to realizing that emotional awareness and social sensitivity are just as absolutely crucial.
Moving right along to Section 2, Eagerness, Consistency, and Integrity.
So what do these foundational traits actually look like in practice? Let's take eagerness. We're not just talking about being excited to do the fun parts of the job. It means eagerly taking ownership of your team's mistakes without holding grudges. It's about stepping up and shouldering the burden when things go wrong. And you have to pair that with consistency. A leader has to be dependable. Consistency ensures you're applying your core values steadily. Think about it. If you're constantly changing your management style or rewriting the rules, your team's going to get total whiplash. Consistent behavior is what builds a psychologically safe, reliable environment for your followers.
A fantastic historical example of this sheer, stubborn drive and eagerness is American Navy Captain John Paul Jones. We are talking about heroic perseverance here. Picture this. It's 1779. He's in a brutal naval battle. His ship, the Bonhomme Hard, is quite literally on fire. It's sinking, and his own allies are accidentally firing at him. When the British asked him to surrender in the face of what looked like certain defeat, he famously shouted back, "I have not yet begun to fight." He managed to toss grenades onto the enemy ship and actually won the battle. It is the ultimate example of drive, sticking to your goal when literally every single obstacle is in your way.
But here's the catch. You can have all the raw drive and tenacity in the world, but if your team doesn't trust you, it means nothing. Researchers Kouzes and Posner actually surveyed 1,500 managers, and they found that integrity, specifically honesty, was the most frequently mentioned leadership characteristic of all. Why? Because without trust and character, a leader's foundation completely crumbles. If we're going to follow someone into battle, or, just into a high-stakes boardroom, we need to know they're principled.
All right, Section 3, Cognitive Ability and Competencies. This brings us to a really brilliant concept by researchers Fiedler and Garcia called cognitive resource theory. It basically looks at how a leader's raw intelligence operates under pressure. The data shows that under low stress, cognitive ability is a massive asset. Leaders use that brain power to gather info, build strategies, and solve complex problems. But, and this is a huge but, under high stress, all that brilliant intellectual ability gets completely diverted. Instead of creative problem solving, the brain's resources get hijacked by anxiety, fear of evaluation, and worry. It perfectly proves that emotional stability, the ability to stay calm under fire, is a fundamental prerequisite to actually using your intelligence.
Let's look at Section 4,
Key advantages of trait theory.
So why does trait theory still hold up? Well, there are three massive advantages. First, it's an achievement-driven framework. It focuses on identifying the exact attributes that empower people to deliver real performance and hit their goals. Second, it's just naturally pleasing and intuitive to our psychology. Humans just have this built-in desire to see our leaders as gifted, special people who can do extraordinary things. It just feels right to us. And third, practically speaking, it offers a fantastic diagnostic baseline. Organizations can use personality and cognitive assessments to identify natural potential and figure out where an employee's strengths are before placing them on a leadership track.
But, of course, no theory is perfect. Let's get into Section 5, the born versus made debate.
This is the ultimate philosophical tug-of-war in organizational psychology. On one side, we have the biological nature argument that leaders are born. But pure trait theory has some serious limitations here. It totally ignores the specific situation a leader is in, and it often just results in these endless, highly subjective lists of traits. I mean, if leadership was purely genetic, corporate hiring would just be a DNA test, right? That's why the behavioral scholars completely disagree. They champion the nurture side, arguing that leadership isn't just who you are, it's what you do. It's a specific set of learnable actions and environmental opportunities.
So, who wins? Well, the crucial takeaway is that born versus made is actually a false dichotomy. Contemporary science points to an interactionist reality. Yes, your biological traits provide the initial baseline. Someone who is naturally highly confident is probably going to feel more comfortable stepping up to the plate initially. But without deliberate practice, ethical awareness, and continuous learning, that raw talent just fizzles out. Leadership is a dynamic, lifelong interaction where your natural predispositions meet real-world practice and mentorship.
Let's bring this into the modern corporate world. Section 6, Real-World Leadership Applications. Take Google, for example. Back in the early 2000s, they actually had this crazy hypothesis that managers didn't matter at all, that they were just a roadblock to engineering creativity. So they launched Project Oxygen and crunched over 10,000 data points from performance reviews to prove it. But get this, the data proved the exact opposite. They found that highly effective managers were absolutely vital. And crucially, they identified these 10 key behaviors, things like being a good coach, empowering the team, and communicating effectively. Google essentially proved that while innate traits definitely help, effective management is largely a set of behaviors that you can strategically train, measure, and improve.
But then, on the total flip side of that highly engineered, trainable approach, you have figures like Steve Jobs at Apple. Jobs serves as the absolute ultimate modern example of raw, inborn trait leadership. He wasn't exactly known for his gentle, supportive coaching behaviors. Instead, he dominated through extreme self-confidence, unyielding determination, and just pure cognitive brilliance. He is the classic example of how intense, innate traits can literally transform entire industries, relying way more on raw charisma and vision rather than a formalized checklist of management behaviors.
Which brings me to my final and probably most important thought for you today. Look inward for a second. Take an inventory of your own natural gifts. Maybe you're incredibly persistent or naturally empathetic. Then, figure out which deliberate behaviors you still need to learn and practice, like communicating a clearer vision or keeping your cool under high stress. The real magic happens when you merge the two together. So ask yourself, what is your unique mix of nature and nurture, and how are you going to use it to step up and lead? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.